Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about the creator versus consumer mindset and why the creator mindset is good for us all. I'm going to use two examples to illustrate this point, and the first example is what happened with Game of Thrones. So, as I'm sure you all know, Game of Thrones was a hugely popular fantasy series that ran for 7 seasons on HBO. The first 6 seasons were generally well reviewed, with fans eagerly anticipating what would happen in Season 7. Unfortunately, Season 7 was a bit of a bomb from the fan perspective, and a lot of people didn't like it. In fact, they didn't like it so much that they hated it. If you go on the internet and look for Game of Thrones reviews now, you would see it filled with fans that are absolutely disappointed with the show now that it has concluded. For example, on the fan subreddit, you could see an image like this with people calling the creators of the show dickheads. And I personally know some people who are perfectly reasonable people outside of Game of Thrones, but when you bring up Game of Thrones Season 7, they just can't help themselves but hate on the show and, in fact, become quite miserable to be around. The reason this happens is the consumer mindset. So consumers want things they interact with, they want their products to be good and high quality. And in the extreme case, when they're not, a consumer gets entitled and angry at the creators, much like what we saw with Game of Thrones. And don't get me wrong, I think it's everyone's right to be able to complain about things and decide when things are bad. But what I've noticed in my own life is when I start getting too complainy and I start feeling entitled and angry, the solution to that isn't to keep poking at the creators or keep dissing the product. The solution is to think about it from a creator mindset. So what I mean by a creator mindset is to imagine you're trying to create the product or the show that you're interacting with. And even though not a lot of us have made TV shows like Game of Thrones, I think it helps a little bit just to try to imagine what it is like, to put together the actors, to work with a complex script, and to try to put all of that into a 1-hour entertaining TV show. And when I think about it that way, I have a lot more sympathy for the creators of Season 7 Game of Thrones. Though it wasn't my favorite season, I honestly didn't like it very much. I don't go out of my way and hate on them because I think they had a really hard task. As someone who makes video games for a living, one thing I've come to realize is that the fundamental truth of all creative projects is that their default state is bad. It is just really hard to create something that is good. And there's so many reasons for it. Things start out as bad and we try to improve them until we think our consumers will like it. And there's so many reasons we don't get there. Sometimes we are so close to the project we can't tell whether or not it's good. Sometimes we're trying to create something unique, so there's no roadmap to follow. And sometimes by the time we realize something is bad, we've put it almost all together. So we're near the end of the project and time and money are invariably running out. So if you view creative projects in this lens, I think you'll be a lot more friendly towards the creators that make something that isn't quite up to snuff. In fact, you might even begin thinking that it's a miracle that anything good gets created at all. My second example of this is what happened with Diablo Immortals. So Diablo is a series of very popular computer games, and it has a very loyal group of fans. Blizzard is the company behind Diablo, and during its convention, they announced that they're releasing a new game called Diablo Immortals. And this game just got an extremely negative reaction. The reason is because Diablo Immortals is a mobile game, so it's played on your phone rather than a computer game. And when Blizzard announced that, everyone booed them. In fact, one fan even asked if it was an out-of-season April Fool's joke. I think this type of extremely negative reaction to the game is again an example of the consumer mindset. As consumers, we want creators to make what we want and what we expect, and we are disappointed when they don't deliver. I understand this desire as well. I'm a big fan of Brandon Sanderson, and he has written a second series of Mistborn books that I am eagerly waiting for him to finish. And he's written all sorts of different books since then, but he hasn't quite finished that series. And when I catch myself feeling angry about Brandon Sanderson, wondering, why did you start that fifth series instead of just finishing that series you first started? I remind myself about this creator and consumer mindset. Because Brandon Sanderson is a creator and he's a human being. He has the ability to decide what to write and choose what to work on. And I understand that creators aren't always inspired to work on the same series over and over again, and cycling between different series might help them come up and refresh their creative juices. I'll put a link to the bottom about a question that someone asked about George R.R. Martin not finishing his books, and it covers some of the same ground as well. Now, you might argue that the Diablo Immortals situation is different because this feels like a business decision that's driven by corporate greed. And I think that is a common feeling that consumers get when creators aren't making what they want. And it is a common criticism leveled towards large video game companies and movie studios as well. All I could say is that as a creator, you have to balance multiple competing goals. And one of the goals certainly is to make money. One of the goals is to create something high quality that motivates your team. And one of the goals is to create something unique. And all these goals really do compete with each other. I've worked at some companies that many people have criticized, like Electronic Arts. And no one that I met, at least, was quite as corporate or mercenary as the internet makes them out to be. So, in the absence of any specific knowledge, I tend just to be optimistic about what people will create. I tend not to think about it as just a pure money play, and think about it for what it is, a combination of something that hopefully makes money, but also hopefully makes the creators proud. I strongly believe this consumer mindset is bad for both creators and consumers. It's easy to see why it's bad for creators, since they're the ones that have to deal with all this negative feeling toward them, and it's hurtful. But for consumers, I think being so hateful towards creators often works against their best interests. So for one, I don't think it takes a genius to understand that if you are constantly hating on creators, that creators are less motivated to create something good for the very people that are leveling these criticisms towards them. So the end product is a little worse because of this attitude. The second reason is it discourages innovation. In an age where people are complaining that Hollywood movies are all recycled ideas of the past, if we jump on new ideas and criticize them, even before they come out, or if they come out and aren't as good as we hoped, then what we're really doing is telling creators, please don't experiment. Just make exactly what we've seen before that has worked. And I don't think that's good for anyone. So to sum up, there are two ways you could view any creative work. You could view it from the consumer mindset, where you want things to be better, faster, cheaper, and the way you like. And in the extreme case, you might feel disappointment, entitlement, or anger when they don't turn out the way you wanted. On the other hand, you could view things from the creator mindset, to try to put yourself in the head of the creator as they're making the decisions and putting together this project. And I would argue that putting on the creator mindset is better for everyone. You'll get a better understanding of how difficult it was to make anything that you end up liking, and you could celebrate that. And when things don't turn out to be the way you like, you'll understand that the default state of everything was bad. And you won't be too angry at the creators themselves because they were trying their best. Thanks for listening.